Good evening. Welcome to the Katerji show with me, your host, Katerji. Look, we are having some issues tonight, as always. Hello, Queen Sabine. Um, I'm not running on my regular computer at the moment. That's off for repair or upgrade, rather. So I'm running on the laptop, so things might be a little bit slower. And the webcam and stuff is all sort of out of the right settings. So can you hear me okay? Is the main question I have. Sound is good, right? You can see me, you can hear me. That's great. So look, without further ado, we've got Eliot Higgins from Bellingcat joining us on this episode. So a huge guest, obviously, if you know anything about the work that Bellingcat have done, unmasking the Skripal assassins, uncovering war crimes in Syria, in Ukraine. They've done some really incredible work over the years, and I've known Eliot from when he started out before Bellingcat even existed. So I can't wait to dig into the history of that. One thing I will say before I introduce him is the impact that Eliot's work and the work of his colleagues has had on the world of journalism. It cannot be overstated. Every newsroom that is worth its salt now has an OSINT team. That stands for Open Source Investigation, OSINT. Basically, every newsroom, at least in the UK that I've been to, that's a serious newsroom. They have a team that's doing geolocation, that's doing verification work, all things that Eliot was one of the very first people to introduce into the world of journalism. So I can't wait to bring him on. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce my guest, Eliot Higgins. Welcome, Eliot. I'm very good, thank you. How are you? How are you? Your holidays? Are you refreshed? Okay, so they're just telling me that your sound isn't on, so I need to figure that out. So bear with me while I can hear you fine, but they can't hear you. So I'm just trying to figure out why that is. Desktop audio device. I don't know why that is. I hope I hope I hope so. Can you hear him now? There's a little bit of a delay, so we need to wait till the audience can say something because I should be able to see you. Yes. Okay. No, hang on. No, it'll be so. As I said, changing the setup has not helped. I think it'll be coming from you. Monitor and output. Say something now.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
It's still not doing anything at all. It's all just. Oh, they can hear you. They can hear you. Okay, apparently they can hear you. Say something
Okay,
again.
I'm going to say something again and then wait the 10 seconds required to hear it come out on
Sorry,
chat.
guys. Let's just double
So
check.
again,
We're
wow,
working.
that's very exciting. Okay, great.
Okay, right.
We'll
Okay.
continue
So
forwards.
normally at this point, Eliot, of the show, I introduce the guest and I tell them to tell us a bit about yourselves, where you started out. But really, your story before you started out is not the story. It's the story of when you started out. So talk to us about your background and how you got into all of this stuff.
Yeah, I had no professional background in this whatsoever. Basically, I had a lot of spare time on the internet and an interest in what was happening in the Arab Spring. I think having grown up in the 90s with the first Gulf War and then the invasion of Iraq in 2003, kind of bookending my teenage years, I always had an interest in what was going on in the world, especially when the US was involved with the Middle East. So I was following the events of the Arab Spring closely. And I was online on places like the Guardian Middle East Life bot blog and the Something Awful forums, where these videos from posted on YouTube and shared on Twitter were popping up from these conflicts, and people were arguing about the contents of them. And I wasn't really interested in picking a side. I just wanted to know what the actual truth of this was so I could further my understanding of it. So I just figured out that you could take the background objects in these videos and compare them to satellite imagery and then kind of win the internet argument about where it was filmed. So that's kind of where it started off for me. And I just kept on doing it. And I enjoyed doing it. I started a blog because at that point, Twitter was still like 140 characters. So explaining a geolocation was not easy. So I started a blog. And it just kind of picked up a following among people who were following those conflicts and wanted more good information about that. And because I was very clear about my sources, what I could say and what I couldn't say, I think that allowed me to kind of have people build confidence in what I was sharing because I was transparent in that way.
Well, I will say I keep looking to find my Stream Deck, but my Stream Deck isn't working. So I will say, I was one of those journalists in the very early parts of my career. Obviously, the Arab Spring was basically I came out as a journalist, started work as a journalist, and the Arab Spring basically started happening around me. And I will say that even though I was still young and cutting my teeth, I was still, because I was working in the Middle East or working in newsrooms in London, I was still interacting with, very senior journalists. And I will say that your blog was taken very, very seriously. And there's a secret Facebook group that we used to use much more prominently, war journalists. And that's how I came into contact with your work. I won't name the group, obviously, but there's a secret Facebook group community for conflict correspondents and people working in conflict zones. And your work was shared regularly there. You were sharing your work regularly there under the Brown Moses blog, which I believe was a Frank Zappa reference, right?
Yeah.
Which must have got over so many people's heads. Like, who's Brown Moses? Like,
Swedish people are very excited about it because Sweden, they know Zappa, so they get very excited. They get the reference, but no one else does.
Well, I mean, look, you were using photos that people were putting online from basic Syria was really the start of it all, right? And Libya as well. Using the photographs of those weapons to look at the serial numbers and verify things, and it really went on from there. But what was the reaction like from, I mean, I know what it was like, but explain it to what was the reaction you had from other journalists when you started out, basically as a guy who was in your own house doing, really quite nerdy research, but research that many journalists had kind of fallen asleep on and never really thought to do themselves. Not all journalists, but many people had never really seen the benefit of doing what you kind of pioneered at the time. So talk us through the reactions you were getting in those early days pre-Bellingcat.
Yeah, I mean, it was always very gradual for me. I remember the first time one of my posts got picked up by an external website. I think it was a German news site, or maybe Austrian, and it was really exciting because suddenly my blog post had got 2,000 views instead of like 50 as I normally get. And that was a live blog of the Hula massacre when that took place. So there was always these kind of like just me recognizing that I was being recognized. CJ Chivers from the New York Times was blogging about me quite a lot, for example. So that recognition was very, I mean, for me, for someone who just didn't have any background in anything, and I was just kind of figuring this out as I was going along, that recognition was really important. But I have found generally over the years that for the most part, journalists are very supportive of this kind of work because they, I think, see how valuable it is to their own interests and how they operate.
So there was definitely some skepticism when I was sharing it. I believe, we'd spoken before, but the first time we really had a proper communication with each other was I interviewed you for Vice, and it was really, I look back at that article now and we're talking about really basic stuff that now is like the bread and butter fundamentals of OSINT journalism that is widely accepted as kind of the industry standard of how you conduct investigations journalistic investigations into these crimes, not the kind of like forensic investigations necessarily that a human rights investigator with access to the scene would do, but everything else that we can do without that access. You were one of the pioneers basically setting this. And I remember having pushback from people who preferred their sources to be briefed by two anonymous intelligence officials rather than the kind of, the work you were doing was very much like, look, you can check it yourself. You can check it every step of the way. And even I experienced, so I had a friend of mine dismiss you as a bedroom blogger. You were in fact blogging in your bedroom, however, or maybe not your bedroom, the living room or wherever. But the work you were doing was serious, and it started to gain real global recognition. At what point did you start thinking, this is what I'm going to do for a living? Because again, you were at this point where your work was being shared by journalists around the world, and you were in fact starting to break the Assad regime's use of sarin. Your blog was first and foremost doing the best work by far of anyone else, and everyone else was trying to play catch up with you, basically. So that's kind of the point that I was really like, this is the next level of the industry. It took a while for newsrooms to catch up, but eventually they did. So what was the point that you realized that this could be a full-time profession for you?
Well, for me, very early on, it was figuring out where this work could sit, because in newsrooms, I applied for like the BBC training scheme, the ITN training scheme. They both turned me down, and this was like a year and a half into doing my blogging, and I was like, just trying to figure out, how do I turn this into something that can pay my mortgage? Because it wasn't easy to make a huge amount of income on a blog that was about this new form of investigation about conflicts that people had kind of, for a lot of the time, moved on from. So for me, I really felt that open source investigation was useful. It could add more information just to the public understanding of these events. It allowed people on the ground to share information about what was happening and have that information be verified by people. So when I kind of decided to do crowdfunding, that would eventually lead me to start to do these training workshops and focusing more and more on the training aspect of this. I was always being invited to do journalism events, talk about my work for 30 minutes and stuff like that. But being able to do those training workshops allowed us to start spreading those ideas to organizations who adopted them themselves. And I think for me, it was really the big moment when I felt like it really got that mainstream media acceptance was the 2022 invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the official one, where there was a lot of coverage that was based on open source reporting, that you could clearly see the kind of journalism class had engaged with that social media kind of communities that were forming around it, who were providing useful information about what was going on. And then very soon into that, you had the State Department referring to seeing stuff in open sources, and then the open source community kind of digging that stuff out because they'd seen it as well. And I think that helped build a certain degree of trust in what the State Department was happening. So they had also learned lessons about why open source is useful, and that transparency can be useful for, making your case. So that, for me, I saw at least two different kind of sectors kind of adopting open source investigation in a very significant way that even a few years earlier you wouldn't have expected to see.
I'm muted the whole time, right? So I said, you don't get BBC Verify, and you don't get the New York Times Visual Investigative Department without the work that basically you guys were doing. And you say 2022 was the moment that it kind of had this adoption. I mean, look, from my experience, it was more around 2018, 2019 that newsrooms started hiring like people to do this specific job. I mean, my first real big break in journalism wasn't Vice, actually. It was ITN. being brought in just to watch ISIS videos and to log the ISIS videos that were coming in. I mean, they needed someone full time on that because there was so much content coming out of Iraq and Syria. So that's really, where I started doing serious broadcast work. But again, all of that stuff really started in the same place. And you took the blog. You were like, "Listen, guys, I saw the crowdfunder. In fact, I helped edit one of the videos that you used for the Bellingcat thing. But you said you started up doing lessons, workshops. That was actually where you and I first met in person. You were doing one of those, and then it led on to the OCCRP, the Organized Crime Prevention organization, another organization that does a lot of open source work. And I started volunteering for them off the back of that. And we did this, anti-corruption kind of investigation. They do really fantastic work as well. So definitely look into them. But yeah, you've changed the scene basically. But the real moment where I think everyone stood up and paid attention to what you were doing was the Skripal investigation, which you broke headlines in every country in the world, pretty much. You were also the target of quite serious Russian, harassment at that point. So yeah, talk us through, because again, the work that you guys did on Skripal was a step beyond the sort of, here's a video from a war zone, let's see what we can figure out from that video. That required, work dealing with databases inside Russia that weren't necessarily open source, but if you know what I mean. So talk to me about that transition from starting Bellingcat as a this is the method that we do, and and we can teach it to you, and you can learn it, and you can apply those lessons to your own reporting. But it eventually became a very serious investigative outlet with, doing work in parts of the world that it's very difficult to get serious information out of.
Yeah, it's really how open source investigation kind of grew organically over the years, because the initial focus was on the Arab Spring countries. Most people who were picking these skills up early on had a focus on those areas, and that continues to be the kind of area of focus until really MH17, conflict in Ukraine, and more focus with Russia then bombing Syria, back onto the conflict in Syria. So the community kind of grew around those topics. So as we try to expand that range of topics, we've tried to stick to open source investigation as our primary way of investigating stuff, and we try and always come back to that. But the Russia Skripal story was different, because that almost started off as just like almost a joke in a way, because when we had the information released there was a Russian site that got their hands on the flight manifest with the 2 Skripal suspects on it, whose passport numbers were a few digits apart, which was very suspicious. Kind of Christo Grozev, who was working with us at the time as a volunteer, he suggested that, I can buy the registration forms used for these passports. And we were like, well, surely they haven't just let them on a database, or they're like, they've not got like the Russian MOD's phone number stamped on it. But it turns out they actually did have the Russian MOD's phone number stamped on it, as well as something that said SS for Secret Service, and like proper. It was like just really obviously dodgy. So that kind of then started us on a journey where Christo was just getting all these different databases. He had some stored back. It'd be things like car registration databases, house registration databases, all from different years as well. So
now, these aren't strictly open source, right? Christo had to bend some rules to get his hands on these databases, right?
So in Russia, there's something called the Provid market, where it's basically the black market for data that's collected by the government and then sold by government employees back to the people. So it's in a sense very democratic. But it's because Russia's very corrupt, it's a police state, you can get this stuff very easily. So spouses will use it to look upon cheating partners, for example. And the phone back details, you can get them for like 2 years worth of phone calls going, not just phone calls, but every time the phone connects to a cell phone tower and a bit of data is transferred, that's all logged. So Christo just started unpicking this whole thing using these databases, discovering not only the real names of the people who were doing the poisonings, but also who they'd been calling. So they're kind of the commander who was actually running things. We found one of the suspects went to the commander's daughter's wedding and was actually caught in some of the wedding photos under his real name. So all these little bits of information were leaked out about them. That then led us to identify the head of a chemical laboratory in Russia that was the source of the poison being used. So when Alexei Navalny was poisoned, Christo got his phone details and the FSB officers phoning this guy just before the assassination attempt. And eventually we established that these were the guys involved directly with the assassination attempt. So that one chemical weapons guy became the weak point for actually opening up that other avenue of investigation. So it's kind of like, well, it wasn't how we normally do stuff. It's kind of like there wasn't a good stopping point where you could say, okay, that's done. Because it's like, oh, here's another bunch of assassinations where we can get the phone data and it's something that can be unpicked.
Yeah, so look, that's an incredible story, but obviously you've become a significant thorn in the side of Russia, and Russia's mouthpieces in the UK and elsewhere have seriously attacked you. I've seen articles in major newspapers criticizing you based on nothing, and I don't want to give the journalist. I don't want to tell people her name to give her more attention than she deserves, because she is just a mouthpiece for Putin. That should basically make it very clear who I'm talking about in the UK. But again, these attacks were completely unwarranted, baseless attacks on your integrity, your funding, to try and implicate that the work that you were doing was not true. That's some of it. Oh, we've lost you momentarily. Hang on, that tends to happen. There he is.
You lose me.
You're back. There you go. No, it's all right. It's a not a very reliable server, but so
Okay.
yeah, you have come under a lot of these kind of unwarranted attacks from these people. The other type of attack I've seen against you is that all of the work that you're correct, and it's only because you're getting fed all of this information from intelligence agencies, and that's the bit I find most astonishing, because it should be a compliment to you, because if the work that you're doing is so good that the only way you could possibly do it is if you had signals intelligence, which means you were wiretapping these people, or you were looking at direct satellite feed of their so how has that affected you over the years? It's a lot to take on board.
I mean, you kind of get used to it after a while. I mean, when it first starts happening, when you've got someone crazy on the internet doing a video about you on their YouTube channel, it's the first time that's ever happened. That can be a little bit of a surprise. But over the years, there's kind of two main sources of threats: state level actors and crazy people on the internet. And I'm often more worried about the crazy people on the internet than the state level actors, because I've had odd people turn up at some of my events making demands for information from me that I don't think I could possibly supply. Very odd requests. But in terms of state level actors, I mean, we've had cyber attacks. We've been attacked in their various media and their proxies. We've had people followed by actual spies working on behalf of Russia, and they were all convicted. So we just make sure that our staff get good security training, that they get good kind of mental health support as well. But none of that puts me off. I mean, it's frustrating when you have to add America to the list of countries you have to worry about traveling to. Especially we've actually just started up a US branch of Bellingcat where we plan to do more work, which has become a lot more of a more complicated proposition than it was 9 months ago. But we just have to be careful, really, and be aware and not kind of just dismiss it as a minor thing.
Now, when it comes to your famous critics, probably the most famous critic of all, if we're not talking about Vladimir Putin himself, will be Elon Musk, who called you, not you out by, but your organization out by name. Everything he said was totally verifiable nonsense. He accused you of doing psyops, which kind of shows you that the only people that use that word are people that are absolutely like just fed total nonsense. And, you know, Elon Musk is the world's most famous conspiracy theorist. He's the world's most powerful conspiracy theorist. What's it like waking up to find that your organization has been put on blast by the world's richest far-right megalomaniacal lunatic, who also happens to control the website that effectively launched all of this? You know, if without Twitter, none of this exists. So it must have been a really personally aggravating moment, surely.
It's weird because it kind of offers you a moment of clarity about a person when they're saying stuff like that about you rather than someone else. I mean, if you said someone else is a psyop, it doesn't really affect you in the same way when you're like, no, I definitely know that's not true. There's no doubt in my mind about any of this. And you really do think, oh, this person is an idiot. But I like to think about this a lot because I have conspiracy theories come from, why people are drawn into this. And I think you can really see the same patterns that repeat time and time again on, you know, people who are flat earthers, who are MH17 truthers, who deny chemical weapon use in Syria. They're drawn into this kind of form of disordered discourse, as I call it. And a really big part of that is kind of when they lose trust in an institution. So they have this form of kind of trust inversion going on, where all of a sudden anything the institution says must be not only wrong, but probably have an evil intent behind it. So this is where you kind of get people who are like, they say they're anti-imperialist, but it's only ever really about America, not about any other country being imperialist, because really they're just doing a kind of, oh, well, I know America's bad from my life experience, so therefore everything America is doing is wrong and everyone against them must be okay people. So I think he's part of a kind of very much technocratic, I think, focused right-wing media ecosystem that he consumes information from. He's surrounded, you know, his friend owns the podcasting network that all the tankies are
All
on
in.
now. That's part of it. Yeah, it's got another name though. I can't remember. I think
the one that owns it. I got approached actually by someone who wanted, and I was like, absolutely not.
So I think people get in those media ecosystems, and then they just have their ideas reinforced. And ironically, it's by the social media platforms themselves. So it's interesting to see the owner being radicalized in the same way as anyone else who'd use that platform via the algorithm that on his own platform.
Yeah, an incredibly bizarre series of events and really dispiriting because, you know, Twitter was, I had a love-hate relationship with it, but it was definitely the start of everything really with regards to how my career evolved as a journalist. You know, particularly you were a particular influence because I was able to start bringing that OSINT method into field work, which is again something that not many people had done apart from, you know, actual forensic investigators. But, you know, particularly when the war in Ukraine started, as you said, there was a lot of attention on it. Being able to give you direct locations so you can geolocate them yourself made a lot of new people, young people, interested. We had Thomas van Linjon, Linger, sorry, I keep saying his name wrong. Thomas van Linger on yesterday, and he was obviously conflict mapping in the early 2010s when the war in Syria began, and he was one of the earlier adopters of your method and used it to. So, you know, it's not just the work that you're doing now; it's that it's influencing future generations of journalists. Tell us about the future of Bellingcat and where you see yourself. You know, where you see you guys growing in the next 10 years or so.
Well, one thing we're trying to do in terms of our investigations is have more diversity in our topics. We've always tried to do that. It's like back in 2021, I was talking about how we need to do a lot less reporting on Russia, need to focus on other topics. And then 2022 came along and ruined all of that. But we try and do a diverse range of topics, but that means there's the challenge of building audiences. And we're doing more and more partnerships now with other, you know, influencers, websites where they have an audience that's interested in a particular topic, and then we'll team up with them to do an investigation. So this, for example, we did an investigation into 1xBet and their very extractive gambling system. They basically have people in sports halls playing pretend sports against each other for gamblers. Search Party did a really great YouTube video on that. They got, I think, about 190,000 views so far. So it gives us a chance to find those audiences and amplify the open source work to them. So you need to have that kind of diversity. So that's kind of what we're trying to do more of. We've had a couple of documentaries we've produced come out, one on called The Antidote, also known as The Kill List, about the assassinations. We had a documentary on National Geographic about MH17, and we've got one that's coming on Channel 4 that is about Syria, that takes a very unique perspective on that. I can't give too many details yet, but I think it's a unique documentary on Syria that I think a lot of people enjoy. And we're also focusing a lot now on looking at education and community building. So we've already been running a program where we build hubs at universities to, first of all, we help them do course material that can be using a range of subjects, but on open source investigation. Then we create these investigative hubs where students can do their own investigations. So we did one already with Utrecht University in the Netherlands, and there the students' first big investigation was police violence by the police who were called by their own university when they were protesting against what was happening in Gaza. So that was a really good way to kind of bring accountability to both the police and their own university for what was happening based on evidence. We're doing a few universities in the UK starting in the next upcoming term. And we're going to expand this because we also want to connect that to local communities, local medias, local NGOs, where there's opportunities to use open source investigation to address issues that people face. So that kind of education and network building is also going to be a big part of our work too.
Well, listen, I'm looking forward to many more years of this. Now, let's go back to the Skripal assassination. Again, it's a pivotal moment really for Britain and the way many British people saw Russia. It was a pivotal moment for the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. It really broke the back of Corbyn's popularity with the British public. They saw him as weak on the subject. A chemical weapons attack on British soil. Were there any moments where, obviously you were working in secret over some of it before? Were there any moments where you looked at Christo and you looked at your team and you were like, you had doubts about bringing this forward? You had, could it really be? Could we really have done this? Could we really have figured out who the people were? Because you were ahead of the intelligence agencies. You were, for whatever information they had, it certainly wasn't being briefed outwardly. And you guys were the guys that came along and were like, this is who it is. We've proved that it's Russia. You were setting basically the tone for what the parliamentary debate was over the coming weeks during that period, because you guys had broken the scoop effectively.
Yeah. I mean, at first, this kind of almost a shock that this stuff exists, this information can be found. But we've also learned over the years that the Russian state isn't always the kind of smartest in terms of communication and information. And we've had some really weird stuff coming from them about our work and the way they've reacted to us in the past. So, yeah, that wasn't too much of a surprise. But I think once there was like a methodology behind that was repeatable, it wasn't so much it was a surprise. It was just like knowing there was like another layer to drill away at before you got to something else, which was also interesting, just digging deeper and deeper and deeper. I think there's a couple of publications. I think the first time we did one exposing the name of the GRU officers, I got very nervous after that was published. I thought that's really going to annoy them a lot. So I had a couple of worried nights. Really, I think there was a couple of times, like when one of our colleagues in Russia was basically very close to being put in prison, that he had to kind of escape across the border into Ukraine, and he disappeared and didn't contact us when he was supposed to, and we got very panicked when that happened. But fortunately, it ended up okay. It's just, that'll give you a sleepless night if suddenly someone like that misses a phone call when you know they're in a dangerous situation.
And obviously, Christo's your colleague, and there have been serious threats to his life. So, what's that like managing, basically being wanted men by a state that goes out of its way to murder people abroad?
I mean, for me, I was somewhat tangentially involved with that. I was photographed with Christo, and I got to see those photos. And when you actually see those photos, it stops them being a kind of concept of a photo like that and an actual physical object like a photo like that. And that's really a strange experience. It's kind of like you in your head, I think you just like, okay, maybe one day I'll be spied on, and these things will happen. But when it actually happens, it's even still feels unbelievable. Like someone's telling you, yes, I had to go into Scotland Yard to discuss my status in the case, which is very strange. But then you actually see the evidence, like the chat logs and the
So,
photos.
what did Scotland Yard say to you? Did they say, we think that there's a serious threat against you? What did they say?
In that case, they were saying that they're actually telling me there wasn't likely to be one against me, that they were looking through because these Bulgarians who are spying on Christo were arrested, and they had all their devices on them that weren't really secured, and one of them had something like 90,000 signal messages between the ringleader, who's a guy called Jan Marsalik, involved with a huge $1 billion Wirecard fraud, and the leader of this Bulgarian group who'd been hired to do the spying. And it was blow by blow what they were doing every day in terms of the crimes they were committing, like breaking into Christo's apartment was one of them, that they had like a blow-by-blow description. Because actually in the court documents, you can see that they broke into one of Christo's apartments to steal a laptop. And the laptop they got, they didn't realize this at the time, was just an old dud laptop without a hard disk in it. But they went through a whole process, which you see them texting back and forth on Signal, of like getting it to someone to smuggle out of the country using like all these different decoys and different kind of routes, the whole kind of spy game getting it back to Russia. And then a few days later, messages coming saying, oh, the FSB are really angry with us because we got our laptop. But they're like literally saying there, I've got my ear up against the door listening to see if anyone's there. And the police actually dusted the door for ear prints as well as fingerprints. So you could see where they'd been putting their ear against the door to hear who was in. But the whole thing was all laid out there, just blow by blow. So for us, it's actually in one way, like when we do our kind of security briefing, we actually know how these people operate rather than having kind of the theory around it that you often have.
So you reveal who the killers are. Because they did kill someone, even though they didn't kill the person they were intending to kill. And then eventually, after a while, the Russian state Simonyan herself, kind of was like, making jokes about the fact that these guys did it. There's no doubt in Russia who was responsible, but the Russian state still put on that song and dance routine, bringing these two ridiculous oafish thugs who are clearly, GRU killers, contract killers, and they pretended to be tourists, and then you had the absurd article I was talking about, and Craig Murray, another one, who was saying, well, what, maybe they were gay bodybuilders, So talk me through, like, then, you've got the serious nature. Scotland Yard are telling you, that they're taking photos of you, you're under surveillance. And then you've got this ridiculous, clownish affair that's taking place in front of the eyes of the world's press.
Well, it's kind of reassuring when you know you're under kind of pressure from a government, but you also know that they're not very competent. So that's kind of takes the pressure off. The CIA, I might be a bit more worried about their success rates. But it's kind of frustrating especially when you're dealing with people like you have on the internet who are always denying the lived experience of people, like saying, oh, that's fake, that didn't really happen. And when it's really happening to you, even though you kind of understand the psychology of it and where it's coming from, it's just like, just give over. It gets so boring being told time and time again that something isn't true because they read an article on the Grey Zone or Marxist Review Online or whatever it may be, because it's always the same 5 articles that they're always sending me to tell me how wrong I am about something. It's just like,
it's always Seymour Hersh, it's always Aaron Mate, referencing the same people who were wrong, who, you know, like, again, it got to the point where I myself, I don't recall if you were there. Maybe you were, but at least one of your colleagues were. We were having briefings with OPCW, you know, staffers to try and put out these fires because they were wrong and they were getting all of this blowback because it was a state orchestrated campaign against the OPCW, which of course culminated in a Russian attempted attack on the OCW. They tried to not attack, but you know, they tried to. They were caught. They had FSB agents, I believe, caught
Trying to hack
outside
it, yeah.
the Hague, trying to hack the. You know, so even the OPCW as an institution came under really serious pressure from the Russians, right?
Well, you had the kind of, I guess you could say, the true believer community, as I like to describe them, who really do believe that, you know, Assad never used chemical weapons, and they have enough information fed to them to make them believe that they're right. You then have the various grifters who link onto that, and then
my favorite are the ones who are like, I still think Assad's a bad guy who did lots of horrible things, but no, he didn't do the multiple chemical weapons that only targeted his enemies, right?
Well, it always drives me mad because they always, if they're talking about chemical weapon attacks in Syria, they'll talk maybe 2 or 3 chemical weapons attacks they know
not
about.
The 200 that we have.
Oh yeah, not the hundreds more that didn't break through enough to the mainstream media for them to care about it, basically, because it's all about this inversionism. It's taking the opposite side of whatever they think is the American position. So if there's chemical weapons used in Syria, it's not about the attack itself, it's about how that can benefit America. And because we all know in 2003 we had the WMD scandals, the kind of logic of it fits together quite simply in the mind of these people. But it's just it's not helpful. It doesn't actually look at the evidence and try and understand it. It's just a way to score points from one side onto the other. And it's this kind of a hollow performance of what should be a kind of a much more serious process. But we don't get that anymore because we have the internet and the algorithms, which doesn't allow us to think about for anything for more than 5 seconds before on to the next thing.
Well, since then, I suppose probably the greatest form of compliment that you could have from the Russian state is they seem to have pivoted slightly towards you in that they now put these videos which claimed that your Bellingcat is revealing Ukrainian corruption or something. You know, they put these like little videos that look like they're from the BBC. They try to make them look like they're from the BBC, which cite Bellingcat positively to reinforce their argument. And also, we have also seen little bits and bobs of like rudimentary geolocation and stuff like that happening on these networks who have basically said, you know, they can't criticize your work, so they can only now try to ape off your success or try to, you know, fake words from your organization to try and buttress their absurd claims.
Yeah, there's this Russian doll disinformation campaign where they've been doing this for a couple of years now, but they'll make a fake upright video from the BBC, Euronews, or Bellingcat. They've started deep faking audio. One thing they would do is take a real video of an academic talking to camera and then cut footage where they would have their deep faked voice over that. They've deep faked my voice. I think because I've moved around England a lot, my accent's a bit all over the place. So you'll hear my the fake version of me always pick up a very specific accent that I definitely don't have. I get very posh when I'm on those AI generated videos. But they've also, and I really love this, they started putting in some of them on Twitter little jigsaw pieces. And so they did it with one set of jigsaw pieces, which I just kind of ignored. But I always thought there was like a couple of funny things in the fonts, like there was like the Bellingcat question mark, but I never really thought about it too much. And then they started doing it with another set of jigsaw pieces, but these were a lot more colorful. So I was speaking to one of the groups who tracks this kind of stuff, and he says, actually, we've put together the first jigsaw puzzle, and it was basically Bellingcat and then CIA, but with the I was the Bellingcat logo, and FBI, and then like 2 fingers pointing up at us. So it's specifically for Bellingcat. The second one was my face as a pile of poo. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yes, you can swear on the podcast.
So like shittier shit ings, belling shit. I thought you could have used 3 different words for poo there.
Yeah,
What? That's wasted.
they're
Come on.
so bad at this. You know?
But it was like an illustration of me with flies coming off it. And there's a new one that's out now. I've got 5 pieces so far. It's numbered up to 99. So very exciting. I'm hoping it'll feature me again because I want to print these out and have them. But they sneakily, and I think they've done this on purpose, the second one was 100 pieces. They've not released one of the pieces. And I think they're doing it to torment me now. So, but I'm looking forward to seeing what the new image looks like. It's now something for me to look forward to every single day. Because what they do, they email us every day a set of links for like Twitter, Blue Sky, and TikTok with their latest videos, which are at the moment all about Moldova. For some, I think what they're trying to do actually is give Moldova reasons to try and cancel the result of the elections if it goes the wrong way, so they can trigger another crisis. This is why they're going after Moldova and the election story so much on that one. But yeah, it's all fun and games, and yeah, it's something I look forward to every day now because of the jigsaw puzzle.
Well, look, I wanted to ask you as well. I have a lot of journalists, young students, come to me in DMs or whatever, and they say, I want to do what you do. I want to become a war journalist, etc., etc. I normally discourage them and say, really, only the very, very committed can do this, and it's very, very financially difficult unless you are, you come from an independently wealthy background, because you're going to end up going long periods without getting paid, basically. And I've had a lot of colleagues and friends step away from this industry over many years. But open source work is something that anyone can do, and as I said, you teach it. So if someone is young and they want to get involved in this stuff and they want to be part of an organization that exposes war crimes, how can they learn the method that you and your colleagues pioneered?
Well, first of all, read everything on the Bellingcat website. That seems obvious, but we have guides, case studies, we explain how we do our work. So you'll have a good education by doing that. We also have on challenges.bellingcat.com, we have puzzle challenges that people can do. So they're on a whole range of different topics as well. So there's always something new and interesting. And I think it's a really good way to learn how to do open source investigation. So you've got a way to test your skills. And we've got a community on our Discord server at Bellingcat. We've tried to move people away from Twitter and less positive spaces. That's a great community, because if you get into an investigation with the rest of the team, we'll often pick that up and then we'll go take it for our editorial process, have it published on the website. You'll get credit for that as well. So yeah, I think there's 3 ways to kind of learn and get involved, and yeah, just keep an eye out for where there's interesting stuff about open source investigation being shared. Center for Information Resilience publishes videos, for example. Look at the work of Forensic Architecture as well, who do really great work. Yeah, just explore the community.
So I wanted to say that I personally, I learned this method from you and the work that you were doing many, many years ago. And I have used it in my work, published and otherwise. The most major investigation I did was for Sky News. That was about an attack on Idlib. And we had basically got as far down to the micro level of, we had the audio coming in from the control towers, the Russian control towers, with the Russian pilots were, dropping their their target. We knew the target was the market, and they were confirming that they had said that. And one of the things they said to each other on that, this didn't actually make it into the final piece. We didn't need it to stand up that the Russians had deliberately bombed this civilian market. But the Russians were, I think the code word was, we delivered the sweeties, we delivered the candy. That was what they were saying after they killed 40 people in a market bombing. So again, I have done that using the open source method to prove that happened. However, I will say, the older I get and the more more field work that I tend to do with my job, I have seen younger people and other people who can do this like it's a sixth sense, who can look at a photo from anywhere in the world and can tell you from 3 different points. So how do you react to that? It's like being British. This is an experience. We taught the world how to play football and cricket, and then we get absolutely trounced by people with the technique, with the game that we taught them. So what's it like for you watching that? Are you still like shit hot at all of that stuff, or do you defer to people who are unparalleled at it? I will share one experience before you dive into that question. I'm not sure how specific I should go into the legality involved in this incident, but there was one point at which me and my colleagues needed to get to a vehicle, and we only had a photo of this vehicle in a car park. And I shared it in the OSINT group, and it took 15 minutes for this person to find a car in a car park in Kiev. And within 20 minutes, I had gone there and had taken a photo next to these guys. So it's an incredible thing that works. What's it like for you watching people do that with something that you helped pioneer?
Well, I always wanted more people to do this, and it was never for me something about, I have to keep it my secret. I realized that loads of people have to do this, because it's not just about those individual investigations, but it's about the resilience it creates in society. And I think in 2022, we saw that really well with Ukraine, where there was such a community of people already engaged with this kind of work that disinformation struggled to be kind of seen and taken seriously because it was debunked so quickly. We could see people tracking the movements of troops. That for me is, if it's one person doing it, if it's a group of people doing it, it's really exciting for me, because I've seen how people coming together with those skills can have a huge impact. And, we see it every day at our work with Bellingcat, but now we see it more and more in different communities outside of Bellingcat. And for me, that's everything I wanted.
So when you look back at the history of not just Bellingcat, we include Brown Moses in that. You've done MH17, the Skripal poisonings, Alexei Navalny, several other assassinations and assassination attempts across Europe, the Assad regime's chemical weapons attacks, as the Mosul bombing of that mosque by the US forces. Again, people at the time were accusing Bellingcat of never investigating the US, and they were just completely ignoring the real serious investigation you'd done into a US-led, basically, war crime. What do you have any favorites personally that you did? I know you've done some child protection stuff as well. Is there any stories that maybe people don't know that you'd like to share about something that you felt like you felt really kind of you had done something there as an organization?
Well, this is kind of on the other scale of things, but I was approached by a organization called Dog Lost, who were looking for stolen and lost dogs. And this was during lockdown period, where people had been taking their dogs for walks, and then they get kidnapped, and there'd be like a car speeding off with their dog, and then it would be sold on Facebook and sometimes get back to them, sometimes not, because there was such a demand for these animals. And they sent me an image of it was from a CCTV camera on someone's house. It was very low quality. It was a car driving off, and there was just a couple of frames where you could see the side of the number plate. So it was pretty much unreadable. My colleague Tinami Allen had a year or two earlier investigated the shooting of a journalist in Ukraine called Pavel Shermat, who was being investigated by various groups, journalistic groups. And they had this CCTV footage of a number plate that was very blurry, but my colleague had used the movement of the kind of camera sensor, just like a pixel here or there in the wind, to actually use it to design a machine learning algorithm to decipher it, and it actually worked. And he used the same machine learning algorithm that he used on the Pavel Shermat case to help find a murderer, to help find the number plate on this stolen this car. We then looked it up on an MOT website, and to say what make and model it was, it matched to what was in the car. And so the people who ran the website went back to the police. The police say, we don't normally do this, but we'll have a look. And the dog was in the garden barking away. So they just picked it up and took it away. So then the second time they came to us, it was a field of, they'd got the owner's details somehow, and they'd sent them a video of their dog watching two dogs fighting each other. And they were like, if you don't pay us $2,000, this is what's going to happen to your dog. So we figured out where that was. The number plates were in the background. It's like really done what they did. And they just sent back their details to the owner of the dog, who then forwards their details saying, "Is this you?" for your address and everything like that. And a few hours later, the dog was returned to their doorstep. The third case, they got to me and they said, "Oh, we've got this case." As I said, "Oh, do you need my help?" And they said, "No, because what we did, we just sent them what you did with the other two, and they immediately returned the animal." And I love that because it shows that how you're actually empowering people to actually deal with these things themselves. It's not just like us always coming to save the day. It's them being able to use that and learn from us to actually, have an impact, even on that very kind of hyper personal local level. Open source investigation doesn't have to be about one person investigating chemical attacks in Syria. It can be about hundreds of people investigating hundreds of interesting and important things to their life. And that's why I really like that.
Yeah, you've got that hybrid element, right? There was that documentary I saw on Netflix, I believe, where a bunch of people saw a video of a man killing a kitten, I think it was, and then they
Yeah.
basically created a Facebook group outraged, and they hunted this man down by just being obsessive. And a hive mind, one person being obsessive is, you might be able to hit something, you might not. 100 people obsessively Googling and researching these, eventually if there's something to be found, you basically find it, right? Like, so actually that's got me an interesting question, because I ran a lot of open source investigative work for NBC into the COVID pandemic, trying to find anything that we could in Wuhan at the start of the outbreak. We came up against a wall because not only was stuff not as easy to find in China, but also stuff was being removed from the internet by the Chinese government, which even we couldn't use Wayback Machine or whatever to try and recover. So have you come up against a wall like that, where there just isn't the data and you believe that there's something there but you can't get to it?
I mean, sometimes I think one of the issues we have with China, apart from the kind of the way the internet is organized there, the fact is there just aren't the language skills in the community. And this actually affects quite a lot of different topics, because I think we sometimes forget that the internet that you encounter in different languages is very different. It has its own dynamics, own kind of content. And because a lot of our skills are focused on Russia, Arabic speaking countries, that means there's a very limited skill language set available for people, and people who have language skills and also know about the online space really, really well, intricately enough to discover things and interesting pieces of information there. So without having that kind of infrastructure of people connected together in that way, I think that limits the potential of open source investigation work. That kind of organized organically around Syria, around Ukraine. But my kind of question is, like, how do you make that organization happen without there being a war to be the primary motivator to it? How do you integrate those skills into society without it having to come through a crisis moment? And I think that has to be led through education. So there was a House of Lords report recently where they were talking about the importance of media literacy skills. And really, what they're talking about is more broadly critical thinking skills being reintroduced at schools. Because the way you can think about it is, in the 20th century model, we had institutions that gatekept information and were trusted in a sense by the public to verify that information that they were putting out, that we kind of had to rely on what they were saying to figure out how the world works. Now what we have is this many-to-many model where we're all getting information from each other, and that kind of process of verification of at that point of sharing is within us as individuals, and that if we aren't educating people from an early age how to do that in a healthy way, then it's no surprise that they get drawn into these ecosystems, because they get their smartphones when they're young teenagers, so they start seeing that stuff. Then it's not enough to educate them when they get to university or even later.
Yeah, kind of. There's a worry that you and I are part of the same generation. I believe we're not hugely far apart in age. You're slightly older, but our generation is basically the only real computer literate generation. Not computer literate. That's the wrong one. Information space skeptical generation, because the internet that we grew up with was largely garbage. It was largely homemade custom websites and forums, right? So like the first thing you learn about the internet is you shouldn't believe everything you read on the internet. But now the internet is a very, if you're like 6, 7, 8 years old and you're growing into this ecosystem, it's a very, very different world for people to grow into. Well, look, you've been with us for an hour. We've got a couple of user questions. I'll dive into those before we ask you a
Sure.
final one. RGB RVB is asking, AI is useful for some of what you're talking about. You mentioned that. Are you guys utilizing AI? Any talk of AI makes me feel very Ted Kaczynski. So like maybe you can give me some positives for some of the work that you might be doing with it, or not be otherwise.
Well, we have noticed recently the AI large language models are getting a lot better at geolocation, like scarily good in some cases. So that's kind of one aspect of it that we're testing. So we'll come back to it every so often. We've got a selection of pictures. We'll test the AIs, see how high they rank in terms of trying to geolocate that. Because as a tool for investigators, that would be hugely useful. Because geolocation can be one of those things that can take hours, days, weeks if they're really
Or,
complicated.
or 15 minutes if you're Obratix or one of the big
Yeah.
guys.
So unfortunately, we don't have one of those at home each.
Yeah.
So the AIs are a good replacement for that. So that's kind of good in one way. I think the other concern with AI is normally about fake news and that kind of thing, and it always comes back down for me for people believing stuff that, rather than people believing stuff that's not true, they'll just not know what to believe anymore, and they'll just disengage, or they'll only get engaged with stuff that reinforces what they already believe. So it's just, rather than creating a new problem, it heightens the problems that we already have.
And we have another question from Hipseek, who says, do you have any recommendations of any resources or communities around really rigorous OSINT journalism, but maybe aren't in the same politics or area of focus?
I think forensic architecture is a good set to follow. I mean, they do stuff that covers political topics, but a lot of their investigation into, like, for the Berlin warehouse explosion, for example, is a really meticulous way of how they piece together that kind of evidence. They're doing a lot on the Grenfell fire as well, which I think is really impressive work, using kind of digital witnessing by recreating VR environments to take people through as they reconstruct events. So I would say they're a good place to start, just for the slightly more visual way of learning as well. They present stuff in a great way.
We touched on China briefly. Are there any kind of Chinese outfits that are starting to? I mean, presumably they'd have to be dissidents abroad, collective dissidents, to do that. I have seen some. I published a piece. I believe it was last year. Might have been. Yeah, I think it was last year. Into Iran and Press TV using COVID funds from the government to fund their own staff. Which is an absurd, thing to do, which they had to, they were trying to play tricks because they didn't want anyone to know they were doing it. Anyway, the point being, the only reason I was able to get that information was that Iranian hackers were phishing into, Iranian Press TV and leaking emails and leaking things that they had found, and we were able to access some of those leaks. So is there anything kind of like this in the China space that you guys are really working
No, I mean, mostly it's coming from those more arms control side of kind of Western social media investigations. So um, I can't think of any ones that are really that good. You tend to have, like, ASPI, which Nathan Russell, who's
Are
someone.
they Australian? I think.
Yeah, they do quite a bit on China as well, but actually in the country, I think that's going to be unlikely.
Yeah, well, listen, Elliot, it's been a pleasure to have you on. You've given us an hour of your time, so I'm very, very thankful and appreciative. I don't have any final questions, but normally I like to finish off by asking them if you have a place that people can go to find your work. Obviously, we'll put Bellingcat and so on in the show notes, but if you've got anything specific, like a Substack or a specific part of the website, maybe the challenges that you want to encourage people to check out, now's the time to tell us about it. And maybe you've got something to say about future documentaries that are coming out.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you want to learn something about open source investigation, you can visit the website, but we also have challenge.bellingcat.com where you can put those skills to use. Our Discord server is also listed on this website. So if you need a community as well, you can go there and find like-minded people.
Thank you so much, Elliot. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the show. I'm sure I'd love to get you back on in the future to talk about one of the investigations that you've got active. But for now, thank you so much for coming on the show. You've been really, really informative. We've had actually the most amount of concurrent viewers for a show so far. So well done, Elliot. People are really interested in this stuff. And also, I'm going to put the bit about the dog in the show notes because people need to find out that you're basically a dog hero. You're a man who has saved lots of doggy lives, and I think that should be more widely
I'm basically Lassie, but the other way around.
You're the human Lassie. All right. On that note, Elliot, thank you so much for joining us. Good night.
That's great. Thanks so much. Bye.
So listen, that was Eliot Higgins. That was a really, really cracking show. I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. We've got new followers. Yes, please do. If you've enjoyed that, please do follow along on Twitch. Please do follow along on YouTube if you're watching. The only way to interact with us live is to watch these shows on Twitch and to talk to us in the chat, like all of my lovely Twitch chatters. Thank you so much to everyone for tuning in and sending your messages. We really, really appreciate that. And again, if you're following on YouTube, really appreciate you liking and subscribing. But if you want to ask those questions, either add something in the comment section underneath these videos on YouTube, or tune in live like all of the people currently spamming the the feed over there. And come join the show. We've got, we're trying to bring you these really interesting guests. I will say that the kind of caliber of guests that we're getting far outmatches the amount of followers and viewers that we currently have. Like, stretching out to Twitter, we now have thousands of viewers live, which is great. But still, YouTube and Twitch is really still at the early stages. So if you are watching us on one of those platforms, please do consider liking us because it helps us grow. And if you enjoy it, then wanting us to grow is what we all want, really. So look, tomorrow night we've got Anshel Pfeffer. He's going to talk to us about Benjamin Netanyahu, what his end game is. Can he find another war to save himself from the corruption investigation? What's he going to do now that he basically can't travel to anywhere in the world now that he has an arrest warrant out against him? We're going to be talking about a lot of complicated Israeli politics tomorrow. And then we got a whole bunch of shows next week that I haven't fully lined up yet. So, but again, thank you so much for joining in. As I said, if I haven't made it clear how big a fan I am of open source investigative work, how important it has been to my career, to the work that I've done, I can't stress enough that Eliot was the guy that made this a thing, and he's far too modest to kind of brag about it or kind of acknowledge just how pivotal he specifically as an individual has been to this world in which regimes committing crimes now have to fear that those crimes can't be covered up. And as a young man growing up and finding my teeth, cutting my teeth in journalism, it was very frustrating trying to have these conversations about things that were happening that we so clearly knew were happening, but people didn't believe they were happening without the proof. And Eliot gave us the tools to prove it ourselves. And that is like, give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Give a man, teach a man to fish. That's really what Eliot did with open source investigative work. And I think a lot of regimes are feeling much, much less comfortable in their positions around the world because Eliot decided to take up a hobby and keep up at that hobby. And he's a friend of mine. I've known him for many, many years, defended him for many, many years. Don't have to do much in the way of defending anymore because his work speaks for itself. But if you're watching, if you're one of those people who dismissed his work to me many, many years ago, I hope you take the opportunity to reflect on that, because being wrong isn't a big deal. Everyone's wrong some of the time, but being so dismissive of the truth is something. It's a deficiency in the character of any person, and as an individual who wants to better themselves, you should want to correct that. And I would encourage you all to learn more about open source investigative journalism. And it really is something that you can do at home yourself. You can follow along the steps, and you can verify it with your own eyes. And I think that is an incredibly powerful tool. And I think that that's something that I can't state enough, just how important it is to journalists. It has made us much, much, much more powerful in the way that we can interact with the world around us. So yeah. Anyway, thank you. That's my rant over. We're not running on the regular system today, so if the camera's funny and if there were some problems, I apologize for that. It might be the same tomorrow, but by next week we should be back up and running again on the full system. But listen, thank you all. As you can see, we're still teething. We're still having some problems here and there. We're still learning how to do this. So any support that you can give us is it goes a long way to making things helpful for conducive to keep growing. And I really want to do that. I think the point that I want to make about this is I'm really enjoying the experience of these shows. It doesn't feel like work. It feels like work having to set everything up and, publish things and go on different websites. And that feels laborious because it stacks up. It eats into the day, the amount of work that you have to, the admin of running it. But the actual process of recording these shows and talking to you guys is always like super fun. So thank you all for making it a fun experience. I wouldn't be able to do it without the audience there. We've had 2,000 viewers at the moment, so hello to everyone that's watching live. Really appreciate everyone that's come on. That's a lot of people to be watching me just talk about stuff. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to check out the Katerji show every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night. It's still a talk show. We're still inviting guests. I'm less comfortable just doing the me talking to you for ages. But, and I say but, some of these days there might be some major breaking news in which, we want to just sit down and react to it. So there might be some impromptu episodes here and there, should the need arise. I'm not opposed to doing them. But it's just about having enough content to, be able to sustain me talking at you for an hour. That's a long time to talk. Anyway, I have spoken for a long time. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Please do like and subscribe. Please do share the videos. Tell people to check out this cool conversation with Eliot. Because especially if you're a dog lover, the dog story, fantastic, right? That's 3 dogs at least that Eliot saved. So thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you all tomorrow. And if you're not around tomorrow, I'll see you next week. Please do like and follow and subscribe. And I'll see you on the next one. Have a wonderful evening.